I want to introduce a new video series leading up to the election called Biblical Convictions That Matter This Election. Besides this video, there's going to be 5 other videos overviewing key biblical convictions that intersect with this election and intersect with public policy. But where I want to start here today is, why even care? What difference does it make? As Christians, does our faith matter in the political world? I mean, why even vote? I think it is tempting to withdraw and just throw up our hands in frustration in this polarized political environment, wondering if our vote even matters. Well, I want to give you a reason to vote, and to vote well. And let's start with this. In Romans 13, government, it states there, is created by God. It says this: "For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished." So what do we see there? Government has been created by God. So when you break the law, it's more than just snubbing the cops. It's snubbing God. So let's look at the next verse. Romans 13 again. "For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Well, then do what is right, and they'll honor you. The authorities are God's servants sent for your good. But if you're doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. So you must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but also to keep a clear conscience." So here we see God's purpose for human government. He set it up for our good. There's a certain grace that flows from government for our good. And what we see here is the basic role of government is to restrain evil by punishing those who do what's wrong and honoring those who do what's right. In other words, government affects people's lives. In fact, government affects people's lives in a big-time way. This is one of the reasons why Paul instructed Timothy to pray for our governing authorities. And he writes this in 1 Timothy 2, verse 2. He says, "Pray this way for kings and all those who are in authority, so that we can live peaceful and quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity." Pray for all those who are in governing authority. Why? Because their decisions affect our lives. Their decisions affect whether or not we're going to live peaceful and quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity. Their decisions will affect how we live. Their decisions will either bring us peace or bring us turmoil. Problem is that sometimes governments get it wrong. Sometimes governments punish those who do what's right and reward those who do what's wrong. They get it backwards. And how that happens is through bad law, bad character, or bad public policy. We see this happening in the Old Testament with Israel. In Israel, when they started sliding as a nation, their leaders became corrupt. So in the prophets, they spoke against civil leaders who had unjust laws. I want you to notice the strong words of Isaiah indicting those who are in power. This is Isaiah chapter 10, verse 1 and 2. He says, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless." What's going on there? Israel was making laws that were oppressing people. It's affecting their lives. Laws affect people, sometimes for our good, sometimes for our bad, and many times just unevenly. Laws can be established that favor certain groups of people, like the rich over the poor, white over the black, man over a woman, adult over a child. In other words, the powerful over the weak. But as Christians, we're called to love our neighbor. And as Christians, we should do what we can to influence our government towards just and loving law and public policy because we love our neighbor. We have been given a gift as citizens in this country to be able to influence our government. You know, there's been very few nations throughout the history of the world that have extended the ability to citizens to vote on its leaders and influence public policy in various ways. In the United States, we have this freedom. And with this gift comes responsibility. I mean, Jesus said this, to him who's been given much shall much be required. Our founding father, Samuel Adams, he said it like this, let each citizen remember at the moment he is offering his vote that he is executing one of the most solemn trusts in human society for which he is accountable to God and his country. To him who has been given much shall much be required. So our goal in civic engagement really is, bottom line, is just to bless our neighbors by making good laws. This is why we should vote and be involved to whatever degree we can. And we should vote according to biblical values. You know, the church is an outpost of the kingdom of God on this planet, and we're to reflect the values and the conduct of the coming kingdom, because we really truly are a different people. We're citizens of heaven, and while we're citizens of America, that's true, we are citizens of a greater kingdom, the kingdom of God. We're citizens of heaven. Therefore, our loyalty is to be first to the kingdom of God, even more than a political party. That's why we're first loyal to biblical values, even over political party values. But unfortunately, many believers don't even consider their values when voting, often choosing candidates whose positions are at odds with their own beliefs, convictions, and values. You know, there was an interesting study done by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life that shows that nearly 2/3 of Americans say their faith has very little to do with their voting decisions. Golly, may not that be us? Let's love our neighbors by influencing the government towards biblical moral values. You know, King David writes something very interesting in Psalm 55, and as I'm reading this, I want you to imagine him looking out of the windows of his palace, looking at the big walls of Jerusalem that are protecting the city, and the walls are being patrolled by watchmen and guards. So that makes this a particularly interesting verse when you consider those walls and those watching guards. It's in Psalm 55, verse 10, it says this, its walls, the walls of Jerusalem, are patrolled day and night against invaders, but the real danger is wickedness within the city. But you know, David got it right. The real danger is not out there somewhere beyond our borders. The real danger is in here, within our borders. There's something worse going on in America than Russia or China or Iran or even ISIS. And it's already walking around in this country. It's the sin virus. And our country is being corrupted from the inside out. It's being weakened from the inside. And the real need in this country is not a strong defense, although that's arguably a good thing. The real issue is wickedness within the borders. I mean, what good will it do, for instance, if you password protect your computer and you lock it down with a padlock on your desk so that no one can take it if it already has a bad virus on the inside? So when I go and vote, I'm going to be looking for the most God-fearing and moral person and spiritually discerning person that I can find at any level of government and vote for them, even if they don't have all the best answers to all the thorny problems this country is facing. And I'm going to be looking for platforms that seem to reflect the best biblical morality as possible. This is really just an expression of loving my neighbor. You know, whether my neighbor realizes it or not, their life will be detrimentally affected by slipping morality and bad law. So please, number one, be informed on the issues. Number two, study the party platform statements. 3, know what candidates, what they stand for. Check out their websites, number 4. Number 5, find out their friends and who their enemies are. I mean, who they associate with tells you a lot about a person. 6, weigh the candidates' values against biblical values. And finally, 7, prayerfully choose the ones that most closely match up with your values. But please, don't let the pendulum swing too far the other way. Don't put your hope in government. Good law and public policy won't solve everything. Only Jesus will solve everything, and he will someday. Don't put your hope in government. Put your hope in Jesus. And frankly, I think sometimes Christians go there putting more of their hope in government than in Jesus. And I think that's what contributes to the polarization that even goes on to the church, because we get overly energized about our politics, about our stances, because something's already shifted in our heart, sometimes shifted without us even knowing. And our hearts have shifted to putting hope in government rather than hope in Jesus. There's a man by the name of Jacques Ellul who wrote the book called Political Illusion. And it's about the illusion in our day that there is a political solution for every problem in life, that politics can solve just about anything. And that kind of thinking is widespread. Not often do you hear a candidate for office saying, well, that's just something we can't solve. Not often do you hear a candidate say those words. No, they promote the idea that there's a political solution for about every problem, and there's not. Chuck Colson, a former chief of staff to a former president, he has some experience in this sphere. He knows what he's talking about, and he says this: the kingdom of God is not going to arrive on Air Force One. Keep in mind that there was a country one time that got it all right, that had the right people, had all the right laws in place. What country was that? It was Israel. Moses came down off of Mount Sinai with civil law that came right from God. Their laws came right from God. Well, how did it go? Well, the story of Israel is a story of a huge slide. You know, the best laws in the history of the world did not prevent Israel from deteriorating. Why? Laws from the outside do not transform us on the inside. Why? Because the sin virus exists in us on the inside. Real change has to start on the inside, and only Jesus has the power to change us on the inside. And that's why we, as a church at Hometown, we need to keep our eyes on the ball. We need to keep the main thing, and the main thing is the proclamation of the gospel. This is the greatest way that we can love our neighbor. Yes, vote biblical values, but even more so, reach out to your neighbor and make disciples. Now, several pastors will be following up on this video with specific convictions on a few important biblical values that are interwoven into this upcoming election. So God's grace and peace be to you.